This is the last place Lynette Hooker was seen before allegedly going off the back of the dinghy that she shared with her husband, Brian Hooker, and vanishing. The story has been such a mystery, and boy, have I been able to talk to some people who are putting some pieces together.
She is wearing a green cover-up. That is the last confirmed detail. A bartender at a pool bar on Elbow Cay watches her walk toward the water around 4:30 on a Friday afternoon. And that is where the visual record of Lynette Hooker ends. What comes next? The dinghy, the dark, the 20-mile-per-hour wind, the flotation cushion thrown into black water, belongs entirely to one person's account, her husband's. And here is the detail that will not leave you once you hear it. 14 months before she vanished from that boat, Lynette Hooker put it in writing. For words, sent to a friend. I can't be out there. She went back anyway. And now the detective in Grand Bahama is sitting at a desk with 7 folders, a financial document that hasn't surfaced yet, and a suspect who has already left the island. Before any of this, there is a house in Kentwood, Michigan, a subdivision street, a couple who have been married long enough that their neighbors stopped noticing them the way you stop noticing furniture that has always been in the room. Brian and Lynette Hooker had lived there for roughly a decade. 2 documented police calls in that time. Not arrests, not convictions, just the kind of calls that generate a file number and a drive-by and a knock that gets answered and then the car pulls away. The neighbors say Lynette had a free spirit, go-with-the-flow way about her. What that phrase actually means is that she was the kind of person who could upend her entire life for an idea she believed in. And in 2020, she believed in the water. The house sold. Both names on the deed, both signatures on the closing paperwork. The equity went into a used sailboat in Texas. Not a yacht, not a purchase, a project. A vessel that needed a year of weekends and the particular intimacy of 2 people who share tools and schedules and a shared idea of what the finished thing will look like. They named it Soulmate. They launched a YouTube channel. The header reads, "Follow us as we sail our new-to-us sailboat from Texas to Michigan." The comment sections filled. The sunsets posted. Lynette, by every outside measure, was living the life she had chosen. What the camera did not follow was the version of the marriage that existed below deck. In January 2024, Lynette Hooker left. She left the boat. She left Brian. She drove, or flew, the record doesn't specify, back to her mother Darlene's lakefront home in Sand Lake, Lenawee County. A house that has been in Darlene Hamlet's name since 2003. Never jointly titled. Never Brian's. And from that house, Lynette opened her phone and wrote to Martin Stevenson, a fellow sailor she had met at Anchor in Florida a few months earlier, a woman who was still a relative stranger. She did not write to family first. She did not write to a lawyer. She wrote to someone who understood what out there meant. She told Martin she had quit her career, sold her house, given away everything she owned. She had made every trade the life required. And then she said it was real bad. And then she said 4 words that CBS News confirmed, that the detective in Grand Bahama has read, that every outlet covering this case keeps returning to. I can't be out there with him. 14 months later, she was out there with him. By February 2024, something shifted. Marn messaged Lynette, something about things looking like they were on the up. Lynette replied with heart emojis and a thumbs up. The reconciliation happened. The Instagram account came back. The YouTube channel resumed. The paddle board clips, the captions, the sunsets, 25 months of sailing posts between that thumbs up and April 4th, 2026. 25 months of content that looked, from the outside, like a marriage that had found its footing. The last upload on the Sailing Hookers YouTube channel, according to the Detroit News, was March 9th, 2026. 26 days before Lynette went into the water. By March 29th, Lynette's Instagram placed them at Marsh Harbor in the Sea of Abaco. They had sailed from Texas to Florida to the Bahamas, moving through the water the way people move when staying still costs them something. Ken, a bartender at the Abaco Inn on Elbow Cay, a man who knows the geography of these islands the way a cab driver knows a city's one-way streets, sees them on Friday afternoon, April 3rd. Around 4:30, Lynette heads to the pool. Brian orders 2 rum and cokes, pays by card, says very little. Ken notes his tattoos, his height, his quiet. He says Brian reminded him of an old war veteran. Ken does not recall speaking to Lynette at all that afternoon. The couple stays about 2.5 hours. Brian returns to the bar once for a second round. The last known photograph of Lynette Hooker is from that afternoon. Green cover-up, pool bar, afternoon light. Brian Hooker's account of what happened next was recorded. Not by police, by his friend. On April 7th, 3 days after Lynette went into the water, 1 day before his arrest, Brian placed a phone call to Blaine Stevenson. Blaine, without Brian's knowledge, pressed record. He later told CNN he did it because he wasn't familiar with the geography Brian was describing and wanted to capture the location names. The call ran approximately 40 minutes. CBS News obtained and confirmed the audio. And what Brian says on that call is not what a man says when he knows someone is listening. He says Lynette basically bounced off the dinghy. He says neither of them was wearing a life jacket. He says the engine shut off when she went in because she had the safety lanyard. He says a pin on one of his oars broke. He says he set off 2 flares. He says no one responded. He says after an hour of yelling her name, he never heard her voice again. And then he calls the entire sequence a cascade of failures. And then he says he would never forgive himself. And then he says he threw the anchor out last instead of first. And then he says he just can't explain it. What he does not say is why, if Lynette went into the water at approximately 7:30 p.m., Brian Hooker did not reach Marsh Harbor until 4 a.m. A span of more than 8 hours to cover what the Bahamian tide tables and Ken the bartender's knowledge of local geography suggest should take significantly less. Ken read the timeline the next day. He told the New York Post it did not align with how long that route takes. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. A bartender who knows his waters looked at the numbers and the numbers didn't close. The Royal Bahamas police force arrived at Marsh Harbor around 5 a.m. after a boatyard worker named Smith spotted Brian and called them in. Smith told the press officers were still talking to Brian when his shift ended at 7 a.m. The RBPF launched a search. The U.S. Coast Guard joined it. The Royal Bahamas Defense Force ran the operation by land, air, and sea. No body, no life jacket, no flotation cushion, no Lynette. On April 8th, for days after the disappearance, the RBPF took Brian Hooker into custody. Assistant Commissioner Eduardo Damies told Reuters the arrest was based on probable cause. Enough pattern for a magistrate to sign off on detention. Not enough for charges. Pattern. The relationship folder. The text messages. The timeline that doesn't close. On April 10th, investigators questioned Brian at Central Police Station in Grand Bahama for more than 3 hours. His attorney, Terrell Butler, confirmed afterward what they asked about. Not the dinghy, not the weather, not the engine. They asked about the couple's personal life. They asked, in Butler's own phrasing to NBC News, in relation to causing harm which resulted in her death. Those words belong to the defense, which makes their appearance unusual. A defense attorney does not use the word death in a missing persons case unless investigators have already used it first. Lynette Hooker's daughter, Carly Allsworth, Brian's stepdaughter, from Lynette's previous marriage, has given on-camera interviews to 6 separate outlets, with TV8, ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, News Nation. She has told the same story in all 6. Her mother was an experienced sailor. Brian was a former United States Marine. And in every interview, Carly returns to the same mathematical problem. If Lynette fell off a dinghy, why didn't a Marine drop anchor first? The answer Brian gave Blaine Stevenson, that he threw the anchor out last and couldn't explain it, is on the record. The 40-minute phone call that his own attorney, when asked by CNN, declined to confirm was her client's voice is on the record. The CBS News confirmations are on the record. And what Carly found when she returned to the Bahamas on her own and sat on her mother's boat for the first time. A headband, an L necklace Lynette wore every day, a picture frame Carly had made, something her grandmother had sewn. That is on the record. She told ABC's Diane Sawyer she talked to her mother as if her mother were standing there. The boat is named Soulmate. The financial picture is where every marriage-death investigation eventually arrives, and this one is no different. What is confirmed on the public record is narrow, but it is directional. Brian and Lynette Hooker jointly sold their Kentwood home in 2020. Both names, both signatures. A sailboat was purchased in Texas in the period that followed. Friend accounts and the couple's own YouTube channel placed the purchase there. But the vessel's precise title holder has not been publicly released. Lynette told Marn Stevenson in writing that she had quit her career and sold her house and given away everything she owned to be on the water. Those are not a reporter's characterizations. Those are her words, confirmed by CBS News, held by a recipient who kept them for 2 years. In American family law, applied to a Michigan domiciled couple, separate property stays with the spouse who holds the title. Jointly titled property divides. In a death, in the absence of a body, in the absence of a will that says otherwise, the surviving spouse inherits. The accounts continue. The boat continues. The pension, depending on how it was elected, either terminates or converts to a survivor benefit. None of that is an allegation. It is the architecture of the financial question every investigator in a case like this is required to answer. The account signatories, the boat title, any life insurance instruments, any beneficiary designations, any changes to any of those documents in the months before April 4th. None of that is public yet. All of that is what the detective in Grand Bahama is working through. The financial documents in cases like this always surface. When they do, they either confirm a marriage that ended in the worst possible accident, or they do what the detective expects them to do. On April 13th, at approximately 8:20 p.m., the detention window expired. The Royal Bahamas Police Force released Brian Hooker without charges. Commissioner Shanta Knowles confirmed the decision was made in coordination with the Bahamian Department of Public Prosecutions, which recommended no charges be filed at this time pending further investigation. Knowles confirmed in the same statement that Brian Hooker remained a suspect. On or around April 15th, Brian left the Bahamas. His attorney told NBC News he had left because his mother was gravely ill. He flew commercially. His destination was not disclosed. The U.S. Coast Guard criminal investigation is ongoing. Marn Stevenson, in her statement to News Nation, used one word to describe his departure while his wife was still missing. Disgusting. Here is what the investigation has and what it does not have. It has a 40-minute recorded phone call in which Brian Hooker describes the night in language that created an 8-hour gap nobody has explained. It has a bartender whose knowledge of local geography contradicts the timeline. It has a daughter asking why a Marine didn't anchor first. It has text messages in which the victim, in her own words, said she could not be on that boat with her husband. It has a reconciliation that lasted 25 months and a marriage that, by Lynette's own account to Marn, had been, in her word, real bad. It does not have a body. It does not have a weapon. It does not have a financial disclosure. It does not have charges. What the investigation does have is a pattern. And patterns, in marriage death cases, are the thing that keeps folders open on desks in Grand Bahama police stations at hours when most people are asleep. Brian's NBC Today show interview, recorded one day after his release and conducted in the presence of his attorney, shows a man who tears up and says Lynette is his life, who says the two of them belong to each other, who says directly to camera, "I've never harmed Lynette and I never would harm Lynette and I want to find Lynette." That is the recording the attorney prepared for. The recording Blaine Stevenson made, the one Brian didn't know about, contains a man describing a cascade of failures without being asked, volunteering details about broken oars and untethered anchors and flares that nobody answered, talking in the quiet voice of someone who believes the door is closed. Those two recordings are of the same man. They do not sound like the same man. On April 21st, 2026, Lynette Hooker is still missing. The recovery window is narrowing. The rescue window has closed. Carly Allsworth has collected her mother's belongings from the boat. A headband, a necklace, the small objects that accumulate in a life lived on the water, and carried them off the vessel that is still named Soulmate. What this case has already exposed, regardless of where the investigation goes, is the specific and documented vulnerability of women in isolated environments with no witnesses. A boat in open water between islands is not a home with neighbors and file numbers. It is a place where the only account of what happened belongs to whoever is still on it. Lynette Hooker understood this. She put it in writing in January 2024. The system that she trusted, the Coast Guard, the Bahamian authorities, the investigators now working through 7 folders, was not available to her in the moment she needed it. It became available afterward. That is the gap this case is sitting inside. That is the gap that does not close when the case does. The financial documents will surface. They always do. When they do, they will either confirm or reframe everything in the relationship folder, the text folder, the property folder, and the timeline that a bartender on Elbow Cay looked at and quietly set down. The detective in Grand Bahama has not closed a single folder. Blaine Stevenson recorded that call because he wanted to remember the geography. He kept it because something in the call made him feel it mattered. He handed it to CBS News because he decided the public record needed it. He did all of this while Brian Hooker was still a free man, still on the island, still describing himself as a husband who wanted his wife found. Here is the question this case leaves open, and I want you to answer it in the comments because I think people are going to land in 2 very different places. The 40-minute call to Blaine Stevenson, the cascade of failures, the anchor thrown last, the broken, or the 8 hours. Do you believe that is the account of a man in shock, or the account of a man who had already decided what story he was going to tell?